You are sitting somewhere right now, maybe on a couch, maybe at a desk, and you are breathing in and out without thinking about it, the way you have every single minute of every single day since the moment you were born. And here is something that almost nobody tells you. Every single breath you take is not just air moving in and out of your lungs. It is a direct atomic transaction between your body and the rest of the physical universe. Oxygen atoms that were floating in the sky a moment ago are about to become part of the water inside your cells, and carbon atoms that have been sitting inside your muscles are about to leave your body forever, riding out on your exhale. And once you understand what 5 minutes of deep, slow breathing actually does at the level of atoms, you will never look at a simple breath the same way again. Before we go further, if the way this channel breaks biology down into something you can actually picture is useful to you, Smart Psychology has a lot more of this kind of deep dive, so consider following along so you do not miss the next one. And now let us get into the atoms themselves. Start with the basic exchange, because most people think breathing is simply air going in and air going out. And that is true, but it hides the much stranger truth underneath it. The air you inhale is roughly 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and a small remainder of other gases. And of that 21% oxygen, your lungs pull a portion of it across a paper-thin membrane inside tiny sacs called alveoli. You have around 480 million of these alveoli, and if you flatten them all out, they would cover an area close to the size of a tennis court. That entire surface exists for one purpose: to let individual oxygen atoms slip across a membrane thinner than a human hair and bond onto hemoglobin molecules riding inside your red blood cells. From there, those oxygen atoms are carried through roughly 60,000 miles of blood vessels, a distance that would circle the Earth more than twice, until they arrive at your cells, and specifically at structures inside almost every one of your cells called mitochondria. Mitochondria are where the real atomic story happens, and this is the part most people have never been taught properly. Inside your mitochondria, oxygen atoms are used in a process called the electron transport chain. And at the very final step of that chain, an oxygen atom accepts electrons and combines with hydrogen atoms to form a molecule of water. This is happening right now, inside roughly 37 trillion cells throughout your body, and it is happening an almost unimaginable number of times per second. Researchers studying cellular respiration estimate that a single cell can produce and consume literally millions of molecules of ATP, your body's basic energy currency, every minute. And each one of those reactions depends on an oxygen atom you inhaled, reaching that exact spot inside that exact mitochondria. So when you take a breath, you are not just filling a balloon in your chest, you are loading raw atomic fuel into 37 trillion microscopic power plants that are running simultaneously to keep your heart beating, your brain thinking, and your muscles moving. Now here is where deep breathing specifically changes the picture. Compared to your normal shallow unconscious breathing, most people only use the top third of their lung capacity during a typical resting breath, which means a large portion of those 480 million alveoli are barely being used at any given moment. When you deliberately slow down and take a deep breath that expands your diaphragm and fills your lower lungs, you recruit alveoli that are otherwise sitting mostly idle, and you dramatically increase what physiologists call the surface area available for gas exchange in that single breath. One deep breath, taken slowly, can bring in and process significantly more oxygen atoms than several shallow breaths combined, which means that in 5 continuous minutes of deep breathing, you are not just breathing more air, you are exchanging a genuinely larger quantity of oxygen atoms into your bloodstream and a genuinely larger quantity of carbon atoms out of it, compared to 5 minutes of your normal breathing pattern. Let us talk about the exhale side of that equation, because it is just as important as the inhale. When your mitochondria burn fuel, primarily glucose and fat, to produce energy, one of the byproducts is carbon dioxide, a molecule made of one carbon atom bonded to 2 oxygen atoms. That carbon dioxide diffuses out of your cells, into your blood, and travels back to your lungs, where it crosses the same thin membrane in the opposite direction and leaves your body on your exhale. This means that the carbon atoms sitting in that carbon dioxide molecule you just breathed out were, until recently, part of the food you ate, part of the structure of your own muscle and fat tissue. In a very literal sense, every time you exhale deeply, you are permanently releasing pieces of your physical body into the atmosphere. And those carbon atoms do not disappear. They often become part of the air a plant nearby will absorb, or a person standing across the room will inhale. The atomic material of your body is constantly cycling through the environment around you. And deep breathing simply accelerates how much of that cycling happens in a given 5-minute window. If any of this is landing for you, this is exactly the kind of thing smart psychology tries to unpack, taking something you do without thinking and showing you the actual machinery underneath it. So stick with me, because the next part is where deep breathing starts affecting more than just gas exchange. It starts changing your nervous system directly. Deep breathing does something that almost no other voluntary action in the human body can do. It lets you consciously influence a system that is normally completely automatic. Your autonomic nervous system runs your heart rate, your digestion, and your stress response without asking your permission. And it operates through two main branches: the sympathetic branch, which is your accelerator, responsible for fight or flight, and the parasympathetic branch, which is your brake, responsible for rest and digest. Breathing is one of the only bridges between these automatic systems and your conscious control. And researchers at Stanford, including Mark Krasno and Jack Feldman, identified a specific cluster of neurons in the brainstem in 2017 that directly links your breathing pattern to your level of calm or arousal. When you deliberately slow your exhale and lengthen it relative to your inhale, you are directly signaling to this neural cluster to shift your nervous system out of sympathetic dominance and into parasympathetic dominance. And this is not a metaphor. This is a measurable mechanical switch happening inside your brainstem in real time. The vagus nerve is central to this switch, and it is worth understanding what it actually is. The vagus nerve is the longest cranial nerve in your body, running from your brainstem down through your neck, your chest, and into your abdomen, touching your heart, your lungs, and your digestive organs along the way. Roughly 80% of the fibers in the vagus nerve are sensory, meaning they carry information from your body up to your brain. And when you breathe slowly and deeply, especially when you extend your exhale, you stimulate stretch receptors in your lungs and diaphragm that send signals up the vagus nerve telling your brain that everything is safe, that there is no threat requiring an emergency response. This triggers a cascade. Your heart rate slows, your blood pressure drops slightly, and a measurable value called heart rate variability increases. Heart rate variability, often shortened to HRV, is essentially a measure of how flexible and responsive your nervous system is. And higher HRV is consistently associated in research with better stress resilience, better emotional regulation, and better cardiovascular health. A 2023 study led by neuroscientists Melnick and Bulban, working alongside David Spiegel at Stanford, directly compared different breathing protocols, including a technique called cyclic sighing, which involves a double inhale through the nose, followed by a long, slow exhale, against simple mindfulness meditation. And the study found that just 5 minutes a day of this specific breathing pattern produced greater improvements in mood and greater reductions in resting respiratory rate than the meditation condition. And it did so within a single week of practice. This matters because it shows that the atomic mechanics we just described, more oxygen in, more carbon dioxide out, are directly paired with a measurable shift in your emotional state. The physical exchange of atoms and the psychological experience of calm are not two separate stories. They are the same story happening at different scales. There is also a chemistry story happening in your blood itself that most people never hear about. When carbon dioxide dissolves into your blood, it forms carbonic acid, which then breaks apart into bicarbonate and free hydrogen ions. This is the primary system your body uses to control the pH of your blood, and your blood pH is kept within an extraordinarily narrow range, roughly 7.35 to 7.45. Deep, controlled breathing changes how quickly you clear carbon dioxide from your blood, and if you breathe too fast and too deeply without control, you can actually push your blood pH slightly upward into a state called respiratory alkalosis, which is why some people feel lightheaded or tingly during aggressive hyperventilation-style breathing exercises. This is also why breathing techniques that are properly structured, with a controlled ratio between inhale and exhale, are so important. The goal of a well-designed 5-minute breathing practice is not to flood your system chaotically. It is to shift the ratio of oxygen atoms entering and carbon dioxide atoms leaving in a controlled, rhythmic way that nudges your nervous system toward calm without destabilizing your blood chemistry. Before we move into the practical side of this, if you have found even one part of this explanation genuinely new, that is exactly why smart psychology exists, to take mechanisms like this apart piece by piece so they actually make sense. And if that is valuable to you, this is a good moment to like the video or leave a comment about which part surprised you most. It genuinely helps this kind of content find more people who would enjoy it. Now let us bring this down to something you can actually feel, because all of this atomic and neurological detail eventually has to translate into a lived experience. And it does, in a fairly dramatic way. A widely cited study out of NYU published in Cell Reports in 2018, led by neuroscientist Jose Herrero and colleagues, recorded activity directly from electrodes implanted in the brains of epilepsy patients and found that the rhythm of breathing was synchronized with electrical activity in brain regions involved in memory, emotional processing, and attention, meaning your breathing pattern is not separate from your thinking. It is woven directly into it. When your breathing is fast, shallow, and irregular, which is exactly what happens during stress, your brain's electrical rhythms shift into a state that is less favorable for calm, focused thought. And when your breathing slows down and deepens, those same brain regions shift into a rhythm associated with steadier attention and reduced emotional reactivity. 5 minutes is enough time for this shift to begin, which is part of why breathing exercises are used so widely, from clinical anxiety treatment to elite military training, including the box breathing method used by Navy SEALs, which involves inhaling for 4 counts, holding for 4, exhaling for 4, and holding again for 4, repeated for several minutes before high-pressure situations. It is also worth pausing on just how many of these atomic transactions are happening across an ordinary day, because it puts the 5-minute number in perspective. The average adult takes somewhere between 12 and 20 breaths per minute at rest, which works out to roughly 17,000 to 30,000 breaths every single day, and across a single year, that adds up to somewhere in the range of 6 to 9 million breaths, each one carrying its own small package of oxygen atoms in and carbon atoms out. Most of those breaths happen shallow and unconscious, using only a fraction of your total lung capacity, which means the overwhelming majority of your body's daily atomic exchange is happening in a fairly inefficient, minimal way. When you dedicate 5 focused minutes to deep, deliberate breathing, you are essentially compressing a much larger volume of gas exchange and a much stronger nervous system signal into a tiny slice of your day. Researchers who study respiratory efficiency have pointed out that this is part of why the effects of even a short session can feel disproportionate to the small amount of time invested. You are not adding a small habit on the margins of your day. You are briefly running your respiratory system at a level of efficiency it rarely reaches otherwise. There is also a historical thread worth mentioning here, because deliberate deep breathing is not a modern invention. Practices built around slow, controlled breathing appear in yogic pranayama traditions going back well over 2,000 years, in Buddhist meditation traditions, and in Tibetan practices such as tummo breathing, which has since been studied by researchers, including Herbert Benson at Harvard Medical School, who documented that practitioners could voluntarily raise their body temperature and alter their metabolic rate through specific breathing and visualization techniques. What modern laboratory research has done is not invent these effects, but rather explain the underlying mechanism, the same vagal stimulation, the same carbon dioxide chemistry, and the same mitochondrial energy production that ancient practitioners could feel but could not measure, are now visible on an EKG, on a blood gas panel, and under a microscope. This is one of those rare areas where thousands of years of lived human experience and modern cellular biology are pointing at exactly the same conclusion from 2 completely different directions. Let us also talk about what happens over a longer time horizon, because the atomic exchange we described is not just a momentary event, it has cumulative effects. Mitochondria are not fixed in number. Your body can actually grow more of them through a process called mitochondrial biogenesis. And while the primary drivers of this process are things like exercise, research has increasingly shown that consistent, controlled deep breathing practice, by improving oxygen delivery efficiency and reducing chronic stress hormone exposure, supports an internal environment where your existing mitochondria function more efficiently and where oxidative stress The damage caused by unstable oxygen molecules called free radicals is better managed by your body's antioxidant systems. Chronic shallow breathing, driven by chronic stress, keeps your sympathetic nervous system slightly activated almost all day, which keeps cortisol elevated, and elevated cortisol over months and years has been linked in research to increase oxidative stress and even to shorten telomeres. The protective caps on the ends of your chromosomes that are associated with cellular aging. 5 minutes of deep breathing will not reverse years of stress in a single session, but consistent daily practice appears, based on the available research, to meaningfully shift this entire internal chemical environment over time. So let us put the full picture together, because it is genuinely remarkable. When you see it as one continuous story, you take a slow, deep breath, and oxygen atoms that were part of the atmosphere a moment ago cross a paper-thin membrane in your lungs, ride through 60,000 miles of blood vessels, and arrive inside mitochondria in cells throughout your body, where they combine with hydrogen to form water and help generate the energy currency your body runs on. At the same time, carbon atoms that used to be part of your muscle tissue leave your body forever, exiting through the very same lungs, and simultaneously, stretch receptors in your diaphragm send a signal up your vagus nerve, telling your brainstem that you are safe, which shifts your nervous system out of stress mode, slows your heart rate, raises your heart rate variability, and synchronizes electrical rhythms in your brain toward a calmer, more focused state, and your blood chemistry itself. The precise pH balance, keeping every enzyme in your body functioning correctly, shifts in response to how quickly you are clearing carbon dioxide. All of this, the atomic, the chemical, and the neurological, happen simultaneously. Every single time you take one slow, deep breath, and it compounds across a 5-minute session into something your body and your mind can genuinely register. There is one more atom worth mentioning before we move to the practical part, because people often forget about it entirely: nitrogen. Remember that nitrogen makes up about 78% of the air you breathe, and while your body does not use nitrogen the way it uses oxygen, a small amount of nitrogen does dissolve into your blood plasma with every breath, and under normal conditions it simply moves in and out without being metabolized. This becomes especially relevant for divers, where excess dissolved nitrogen under pressure can cause serious problems. But for someone practicing deep breathing on land, nitrogen mostly acts as a quiet passenger, riding along with the oxygen atoms that are doing the real metabolic work. The reason it is worth knowing this is that it completes the picture. Every single breath is genuinely a small package of the entire atmosphere. Oxygen for your mitochondria, nitrogen along for the ride, and trace gases in amounts too small to matter, entering your body together and then separating once inside. And it is also worth noting that the effects of deep breathing are not identical for everyone. People with naturally higher baseline anxiety often show a larger shift in heart rate variability from the same 5-minute practice compared to people who are already fairly relaxed, and endurance athletes, whose lungs and hearts have adapted to years of training, often show a smaller relative change, simply because their resting respiratory efficiency is already closer to what deep breathing is trying to achieve. None of this means the practice does not work for you personally. It simply means the size of the shift depends on where your nervous system is starting from. If you want a simple version to actually try, here is one grounded directly in the research we just walked through. Sit or lie down somewhere quiet. Inhale slowly through your nose for a count of about 4, allowing your belly and lower ribs to expand rather than just your chest. Hold that breath gently for a count of about 4, then exhale slowly through your mouth or nose for a count of about 6 to 8, making the exhale noticeably longer than the inhale, since it is the extended exhale that most strongly stimulates the vagus nerve. Repeat this for 5 minutes, and if you want to try the specific technique from the Stanford study we mentioned, the cyclic sighing pattern involves 2 inhales through the nose back to back, a short one followed by a slightly deeper one, then 1 long slow exhale through the mouth, repeated continuously for the same 5 minutes. Before you go, it is worth remembering that smart psychology puts out content like this regularly, taking ordinary everyday actions and showing you the extraordinary machinery running underneath them. And if that kind of thing genuinely interests you, subscribing means you will not miss the next one, and honestly, that alone is a better use of your next click than scrolling further right now. So the next time you sit down for 5 minutes and breathe deeply, on purpose, slowly, with intention. Remember what is actually happening. You are not just calming down, you are conducting a real atomic transaction with the physical world around you, trading oxygen for carbon, trading tension for signal, and quietly rebuilding the chemical and electrical conditions your body needs to function at its best. And that is available to you, for free, in the very next 5 minutes, whenever you choose to take it.